Thank you, and welcome to the Patriots 300 Level Podcast. My name is Eric. I'm joined by my co-host Kevin. Welcome back for our 70th episode this week, where we'll be discussing the upcoming free agency slash tampering period and the signing period, and we'll be discussing who we think the Patriots should target in the coming days and weeks. As a reminder, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Pats 300 Level Pod for up-to-the-minute updates and commentary on news of the day, as well as at our website at pats300levelpod.com. So Kevin, it's been a couple weeks since we talked last. Free agency's about to get going. We've had a couple news signings, both with the Patriots and around the league, that we'll get into in a minute. What are your thoughts? Are you feeling optimistic that we have the cash to burn and we'll be back in the playoffs competing for a Super Bowl next year? Do you think it's more of a reset for 2 to 3 years? What are your thoughts overall of going into this free agency, of what you're hoping for and what to expect?
What I'm hoping for, what I expect, I think, are two different things. So what
Yeah.
I'm hoping for is that they um, use the money that they have and use it smartly, but
Yep.
also try and contend because I think we both agree that I think they're going to take a step back from the coaching aspect. But realistically, they weren't that far off last year, and they just basically needed competent quarterback play to be in it. So I think by just changing the quarterback position overall, it'll give them a better chance to succeed, and even changing the offensive coordinator. And I think that depending on what they do, they have the ability through free agency, with the amount of money that they have, to contend pretty quickly. They may not work for the long run, and that's what the draft is for. But I think they could definitely make some moves to make sure that they're contending. Are they going to do everything I want them to do? I don't think so. They never do. And I think the one thing I'm afraid of what's going to happen, is we've seen this a lot so far, is I'm afraid that the guys that are going to be out there, and we always seen this, a lot of the top talent guys aren't there this year because they're being franchised, they're being re-signed because all of these other teams where they would have lost them before, they have more cap space just because the cap went up, so they have more room to spend on their guys. So the guys reaching free agency are not as high quality
And not only
as.
did it go up, it went up, I think, $12 million than what everyone was expecting
Mhm.
to. So that's an extra $12 million to work with.
Yeah. So the guys that are there aren't all the highest, like you look at wide receiver, it's, you don't have a true number one wide receiver out there.
Yep.
But I think you have a ton of money. You can spend that money. And I think part of me thinks that they will spend it, just because I think that Kraft is so um hyped up on, as I mentioned, that he's going to try and make it seem like Bill was the one that didn't want to spend the money.
Yep.
Whereas I think if you even think about it rationally, every team has a budget. So it's not that Bill doesn't make his own budget and Kraft just signs a blank check. Um, so I think this part of that, but I am a little afraid, and we've seen a few times where they may turn to the Red Sox, where they were interested in this player and they want to make it known that they're interested in someone, but they just don't sign him.
Yep.
And they don't pony up the amount of money for him. So I'm afraid that's what's going to happen. Am I fully expecting it? No. But this is in the back of my mind.
I,
I'm just
I
worried
I
that
think
may happen.
there's two extremes you could see. You could see that aspect where they're not willing to give the top dollar, which it at least with football, you have a salary cap and you also have a salary floor, essentially over the span of a 3 year period. So you have to spend a certain amount within that time. So you actually have to spend. It's better not to overpay. The other extreme is that you think that you were so close in all those games last year that we're just missing it, and then you overpay for people that are inferior players because of the pool of talent available. So you're overpaying for players, you're locking in money, and then essentially doing what the Raiders did a few years ago, where you're trying to do both, build for the future, but also compete now. And you can do that, but not the way that you can't sign 2 or 3 stars, but then also try and build through the prepare for the future too. Like you have to do it a slow transition to an
Yeah.
extent, depending on how close you think you really are.
Mhm.
If you're right there, then yeah, go all in. But if you're not right there, you can't go all in, but also not.
Okay. All right. So we'll get into kind of what's happened so far real quickly. I think everyone's seen it, so we're going to dive in depth. Hunter
Yeah.
Henry, and just right before that we started recording, Bourne was re-signed as well.
Yep.
Henry, we know a little bit more on. He was 3 years, 27 million, only 15 guaranteed. It really works out to be front loaded in the first 2 years. The last year is not guaranteed at all.
Yeah.
And Bourne's the 3 years, it's up to 33. I highly doubt we're going to be seeing him close to the 11 million annual average for that. I think he's
Yeah.
probably going to be closer to probably 6.5, if I had to guess, 6.5 to 7 million. And
I
I
think it's
would,
going to be very similar to the Juju contract. A
mhm.
lot of incentives. That final money is not close to what the guarantees are.
Yeah,
And then
it's
Hunter
probably
Henry,
only a year or two guaranteed. It's probably only a year and a half guaranteed, basically.
yeah, it's
Similar
probably more
to,
money guaranteed in the second year because he's coming off injury. So
hmm
to help insure the player, but I think it makes sense. He was your best receiver 2 out of the last 3 years. The one concern is, like you said, there aren't many great receivers
hmm
in the free agency period, which we'll get into in a minute. And if you're just essentially rolling back with the exact same team, how do you expect the offense to really be different?
hmm
Um, but again, I think it makes sense based on him being one of the better wide receivers available, and he's worked well in this system, in this offense at least. Hunter Henry makes sense too. He is getting older, but it's not a lot of guaranteed money. That contract comes in AAV at 13th highest for a tight end, so right in the middle. He's been productive for you. He's been a captain for multiple years,
hmm
pretty durable during his time with the Patriots, even though he was injured most of his early of his career. So I think both those contracts at that money makes a lot of sense for this team.
Yep. Next one they signed offensive tackle Chuck's Oak or a
Okafor,
four. I struggle with that name.
Okafor.
Um, a former Steeler. Um, and he's if he is going to be your swing tackle, I think it's a really good signing. He was
Yep.
really productive. Well, not really productive. He was productive enough for that position.
He started
He's
55 of the last 64 games the last
mhm,
4 years, and most of the games he didn't start during that time is when he was benched for criticizing the offensive coordinator,
yep.
the Steelers. But again,
um,
like he's a tackle with experience, right tackle mostly in the NFL with the Steelers. But when he was in college, he played a lot of left tackle, so he has experience,
mhm.
at least at the last two highest levels at both positions. NFL mostly right tackle, but
Yeah. So if he and Connor McDermott are your two swing tackles, I think that would be really good for the team.
yep.
What I'm hoping, and they're claiming is not the case, is that it precludes them from really signing Owenu. And we'll get into that in a little bit, what we think of him. And then the last bit, Kyle Duggar get the transition tag. Um, this I don't really get.
I
I
I
get
do
it
to an
to I get
extent.
why they did it to a point, but I also don't. So I'll go with my kind of reasoning why
Yep.
I think it's kind of wishy-washy. Where one, I think one of the reasons why they transition tagged him rather than franchising him was because the Mayo did come out saying how tagging isn't really fair for the players, and he's a former player, so I think he's trying to be that kind of players coach where we're going to do what's right by the player, and we still want you, and we want to have the right to match you, and you can go and see what your best offer is, and whatever it is, you can bring it back, and we'll match it that way. Um, I do think that if you're going to tag anyone, the person that makes the most sense to tag and the one that has the most impact on the team is Michael Wenu. So I think he's way more important to this team than Kyle Duggar is.
Yep.
And you're, by the way that everything's sounding, you're way less likely to sign a Wenu than you are Kyle Duggar.
Yeah.
Just by everything that's out there. Wenu is by far one of the best linemen there is on the market. And I would rather have franchise him, know that you're paying him $20 million at minimum for this year for that. And then focus on Duggar, where Duggar right
And the thing
now,
too is if you lose a one, you have to get new both tackles, both
yeah.
a left tackle and a right tackle.
Whereas Duggar, it's a pretty there's a pretty big market right now for a lot of big names for safety. So it's a pretty depressed market for how much they're going to get paid. And the NFL has slowly started devaluing the safety position. So even 13 million, he may not even get 13 million. So
Yeah.
they may even end up rescinding the transition tag depending on what the kind of offers are out there in the market.
I don't think
So
you can rescind it
you
one
can
or
rescind it.
you can
He could rescind it up until he signs. So if he'd be smart to sign it right now, that way they can't rescind it.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
they can rescind it until he signs it.
Yeah. But I think too, this is my thoughts of why they did it. I think it's a good negotiation. So you can essentially say, go see what your market is. If we feel comfortable paying that. So it's essentially letting other teams do your bidding for you, where you're
Hmm.
not overpaying for him. Um, but by doing that, chances are he would have come to, if he wanted to come back, he would have
Hmm.
come to you saying, "This is the best offer I got. Can you match it? Or can you do more? What's your
Hmm.
best offer?" So essentially, if it's someone that you like and he likes being here, he would be doing the transition tag for you anyway.
Hmm.
It's up to if you're comfortable going to what that highest offer is.
Yeah.
Versus a Wenyu where I don't know if he's coming back. I don't know if he's what you're willing. A team, there's so many teams that are in need of offensive line play, and Onwenu is both the best guard and the best tackle on the market. Tackles get paid, but I wouldn't be shocked if he gets way outside your price range. At least tagging him, it buys you
Hmm.
a year, and then maybe you can work on some long-term deal with him. But with Duggar too, even though he is important for the defense, you have potential replacements in house. Mapu can
Hmm.
play safety. You have Josh Bledsoe who's coming back. You could bring back Miles Bryant. Even Jalen Mills played really well at the safety position. If you bring Jalen Mills back primarily as safety, there are a lot of replacements in house, let alone on the free agent market. So I
Hmm.
think the transition tag helped a lot with this year with how many good safeties are on the market. So you might be able to get a long term deal relatively cheaper because of that. But I still would have rather used the franchise tag. The only thing I don't know is if he signs a transition tag, if you were to franchise him next year, is it at that second level of the franchise? Because if you franchise someone the second year, it goes up exponentially than what the first year was. Or since he wasn't franchised, is it what that first level franchise tag is? That I don't know. But
Hmm. Um, yeah, no, I agree completely. So, let's get into kind of what because the free agency is starting tomorrow, or if you listen to it, 'cause I'm gonna be probably posting this late at night, today, that what are the offensive wants, and then we'll get into defensive wants and then some mailbag questions real quick. So obviously quarterback is the probably the primarily the biggest position, because they traded away Mac Jones today, for a 6th round pick. Um, and we didn't really give any of our thoughts on that yet. So quickly, I'll just say that wasn't surprised based on everything I was saying. It sounded like they were going to be trading him.
yeah,
I think he probably has more value to the team itself than a 6th round pick. But it's also doing right by Mac, so I think that
yeah.
might be a little bit fair to him. He
The only thing
also
that surprised me, I'm not surprised he was traded. The only thing that surprised me was it was to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I would have
mhm,
figured another team would have gone for him as a potential good backup,
mhm,
maybe try and develop him in a system. Like the Rams, just playing behind Matthew Stafford, maybe McVay can get the best out of him.
mhm.
Or in San Francisco, I believe Sam Darnold's a free agent, so
Yep.
they'll be needing a backup quarterback. Kyle Shanahan really liked him coming out of the draft.
Mhm.
Maybe he can be the backup to Brock Purdy if knowing how Shanahan is with quarterbacks, maybe Mac Jones will eventually
Yeah.
beat the job out of Purdy if Shanahan blames Purdy for that Super Bowl loss.
Mhm.
The Vikings, they need a quarterback. If Cousins leaves, they have good weapons. Maybe Mac is someone that can fight for the job, probably a backup. Same with the Falcons, too. So I was expecting a team where he'd have a chance of either going to an offensive coach that thinks they can get the best out of him as a
Mhm.
backup role, or a place where he might fight for a starting job just because there are teams that need quarterbacks and there aren't a ton available.
Yep. No, no, agreed. I think that was one thing that surprised me too. I would have expected either the Rams or the Vikings. I thought if I had to guess, would have been the two destinations
Yeah,
that would have been best
same.
for him, and that would probably give up more for him. Um, but yeah, he's the one that's responsible for basically killing Bill Belichick. So
Yeah.
I'm not too upset to see him gone. So I'll hold a little bit of a grudge on him for that. In the back of my mind, before I always want to see him have success, but
I still want to see him have
um,
success. I'll root for him, but
I don't want to see it anymore. All right, so going on quarterback. There's no really good option out there. The only one, Baker was
I
re-signed
it
by.
depends on. So this is something that you and me disagree on, and
Mhm.
people that follow this podcast know you and me agree on a lot of things, but this is
Yeah.
something that we disagree on per se. I think. I was not big on Baker Mayfield going into this free agency because I don't think Baker Mayfield is a top 10 quarterback. I don't think he will take you to that next level. If you sign him long term, I thought it was going to be a 4 to 5 year deal at 40 plus million AAV. I was off on both the contract and the money, but still, I don't think he's that next step. I think he's a mediocre quarterback that's going to keep your team mediocre, where you're not good enough to make it to the Super Bowl, but not bad enough to be able to draft a quarterback early that's going to be the difference maker or get one in free agency. So by going with Baker Mayfield, I thought it was just extending the mediocrity. So that's why I didn't want him. I would be perfectly fine with Jacoby Brissett or crab legs Jameis Winston. I prefer Jacoby Brissett, but both of them, Winston has matured a lot in the past few years since he's gone to the Saints. Both of them are very well regarded in the locker room, in the quarterback room, and they're not likely going to win you a Super Bowl this year. But the thought is you're going to be drafting a young quarterback, whether at three, whether later in the first round, whatever route you decide to go. Whereas they're going to be able to give you competent quarterback play. Jacoby, he won't win you many games, but he also won't lose you many games. Crab Legs can win you some games, but he can also lose you some games with his interceptions. But again, they're both there to help mold and mentor the young quarterback you get with the hopes that both can start this year and then hand the reins over next year while still being that Brian Hoyer type, the mentor in the air, essentially quarterback coach on the field for the guy. So that's why I don't think the Patriots are in a position to win this year. Going into even though the AFC is mediocre at best and there's issues with the AFC East, I don't think they're in a position to make it to the Super Bowl this year. So that's why I'd rather help along the quarterback that we draft's growth with a good mentor in the room. So those are
Um,
my two options for me.
so my initial option was Baker, assuming
Yep.
I didn't think Eric's evaluation of 40 to 45 for 5 years was going to happen, and it didn't. I was thinking it was going to be closer to 35 to 40, and I thought it would be in the range of kind of like the Daniel Jones, where you're really only locked in for the first 2 years, and that's pretty much what happened. So it was 3 years, 100 million, but really only 50 guaranteed. So it's really the first 2 years are guaranteed at 25 per. Um, and I think this is where I disagree with Eric. I think Baker's a winner. I don't think he is a top 10. He might be depending on when he plays. But when we do this exercise, the top 10, once you get past like 6 to 7, it's really murky where they're all pretty much the same anyway. So you could argue he might be a top 10 quarterback. Is he like the top 10 like quarterbacks how they used to be back like 5 or 6 years ago when it used to be Brady, Manning, Roethlisberger, all those people? No. But I think he when push comes to shove, I think he's got a lot of winning traits. And that's something that you really need in a leader and a quarterback. He's not the tallest guy or the biggest guy, but when push comes to shove, he wins a lot of games. He brought the Browns to their first playoff race in a long, long time, and did really well in that playoff run. Did well in the playoffs this year. I really like him as a quarterback, and I think that what would have really benefited this team is that whoever you draft, and this is where something me and Eric do agree on, we really would prefer the quarterback to sit for the first year because we've
Yep.
seen all the statistics what happened when a quarterback sits rather than playing initially, and it just the amount of people that have benefited from sitting it has really there's been a lot of people, but there's been some people that have started and have done well, but um by having Baker, if you sign him for that, basically the deal he got, you're pretty much only locked in for the 2 years. And
Yes, but if you're taking a quarterback at three, are you going to sit them for the second year too? That's where I think if you're drafting
in
someone
that
at the end of the
aspect,
first,
you don't really need to. You can bite the bullet on that second year because he's on a rookie contract.
but
So,
that's the thing is since he's on a rookie contract with that amount of money in that second year, that's
mhm,
when you can take that leap where you can spend more money to improve the
mhm.
team instead of having 25 million in a guy that's not going to play.
Yeah, but it's 25 million. So you could spread that a number of different
That's a
ways.
number one wide receiver.
Yeah, but you could spread the 25 million over years that if you sign that number one wide receiver, you could do cap manipulations so that 25 million of Bakers doesn't really kill you and you
Yeah.
can end up spreading it over time too. So I would have done it just to have Baker for that number for that first year, so that way you can get to the playoffs, see what happens. Something funky could happen. They could win a game or two and have an exciting year, because this team isn't that far off. If you solve the quarterback position, if you solve the wide receiver position, you solve the line. So
Solve the
it,
tackle positions, solve the defensive coaching.
yeah, so that's where I thought, and
Yeah.
because pretty much Baker would get you there for year one. And then here's the thing: what happens if you do draft this guy and he's not developing the way you want him to? You're gonna be
Then at least in
screwed.
3 years, you have a position, 2 to 3 years,
No,
you're
but
in a
here's the
position
thing
to at
though:
least redraft.
you'll know how he is going. So you'll know how ready you feel going in year two. Are you comfortable with him taking the reins? Are you not? If you're not, you start Baker again and then still keep developing him. Justin Love, Jordan Love, not Justin Love. Jordan Love needed years to develop his was it the second year or third year, whatever it
But he
was when he
also
had the
wasn't a top three pick. He wasn't projected to go that round. He was projected to be more of a developmental
yeah.
player. Assuming
But
you go quarterback
mhm,
at three. If you go Marvin Harrison and you take one of the guys later, even though I'd argue Michael Penix is probably the most pro ready out of
mhm,
people after Caleb. But if you're going with someone like a Spencer Rattler, if you're going with someone like a Bo Nix or JJ McCarthy, okay, I get it. If you draft them late in the first or early second. But if you're drafting a quarterback at three, they should be ready to go year two. That's the thing that,
should, but
but
I
if
don't
they
want to
don't,
hinge all my bets on that.
but again, if they're not ready to go after a full year with that
Mhm,
potential, then again, with the Baker Mayfield, I think you're biting the bullet and you're staying in a level of mediocrity where you're not going to get much better, but you're not going to get worse
mhm,
enough to get another QB. So that's my opinion based on
mhm,
how I view Baker. I think that they'll be mediocre 7 to 9 wins. They'd be what the Steelers have been the last 4 or 5 years,
mhm,
where again they're not good enough to get a good quarterback, but they're not bad, or they're not good enough to win, but not bad enough to get a good quarterback.
mhm.
So that's my fear with
Yeah.
that.
But anyway, since Baker's not here and
Yep.
he could never reach free agency, we'll never know what happened, what would have happened. But usually he probably had some feelers out there just to see what was out there. And
Also, the one thing with Baker too is you don't know how he will be as a mentor for a rookie quarterback.
I would have figured something out with that. You can
Yeah,
always sign one of these other guys too. And because they're not going to be costing a ton of money, you could have three quarterbacks. Zappy is gone in my mind. I don't want him
yeah.
here.
Oh yeah, I don't
So
want
I
him
would
either.
have, I would have whoever you're signing to, if you signed Baker, I would have had Baker, I would have had a rookie, and I would have had some sort of mentor guy, like a
Brian Hoyer.
Hoyer or
Don't
yeah,
sleep on
probably
Brian Hoyer.
Hoyer, because he's never going to play for you, but he could sit there and coach basically and get
Yeah.
paid the veteran minimum. So anyway, now that Baker's not available,
Who would you go
uh,
with?
I would go with Minshew. So the reason why I want to go with Minshew is the same reason I'd go with Baker Mayfield, but to a lesser extent. I don't think he's as good as him, but I also think he's a winner. So whenever he plays, he usually I don't think he's that great. I think he's all right. But like when you watch him, he doesn't do anything that really awes you, other than he's kind of mobile. He throws on the run really pretty well. Um,
He's like a more effective Tebow in your eyes.
Yeah, he's a winner. So whenever he plays, he wins. Uh, so I don't know, something about that. I can't put my he's just a winner. I don't know if it's the mustache and hair and that he wins, but yeah. So that's what I'd go with. You could talk me into Jacoby Brissett. I don't want Jameis Winston on here. Um, you could also
James Winston
talk.
would be so entertaining though.
You
If
could
you
also
actually
talk me
watch his
into someone
interviews,
else
he'd be
who is not a
hilarious.
free agent right now, who
What?
is going to be a free agent whenever he's
Uh,
cut soon. And his name
no.
is
I want nothing.
James Richard Garoppolo. I don't know
I
if
want
that's his
nothing
middle
to
name.
do
I
with
think that's
Jimmy
his
G.
middle name. He's going to be suspended for the first two games of the year. I wonder if that may get cut down when he appeals it, because pretty much he was just taking Adderall without notifying the league, and there were some thoughts that the Raiders may have been complicit in notifying the league about that happening because they want to get rid of him and um, not pay him his the money is owed. And yep, it is James Richard Garoppolo. So
The
I
one thing with Jimmy that because he's suspended and also I don't see any team really signing him if we'll get into this in future episodes, but I wouldn't be mad at the idea of the Patriots signing like a Jacoby Brissett, crab legs, and then drafting two quarterbacks, one in the first round, one in the mid rounds, and then hoping you hit on one, sort of like what Washington did when they got Griffin number two or number three overall, and then Kirk Cousins in the fourth round,
Mhm.
and then sign Jimmy G to practice squad. And then if your quarterback gets hurt and you're not ready for the rookie, Jimmy G can go in. He can be a practice squad elevation for 2 to 3
Mhm.
games, and then if your quarterback gets hurt, you can sign him to the active roster just to play, just to help prolong having to force a rookie in if they're
Mhm.
not ready yet. If the rookie's ready, then go ahead. But that's the only way I could really see a Jimmy G working, where you sign him as a backup for the practice squad, where he's not really taking up an actual
Mhm.
roster spot.
All right. All right. So we've been going pretty long here. We'll move in quickly. Running back position. I just hope that they just re-sign Zeke. That's who I'd want.
Yeah,
Supposedly they're
I'd
in
want
on Saquon Barkley. I wouldn't spend a
nah.
shit ton of money on him.
Yeah,
But that's some rumor, and it wouldn't surprise me them being stupid and just paying a shit ton of money for him. But
I
we'll
really
see.
want I would want Zeke back. He still looked like he had stuff in the tank last year.
Mhm.
His stats aren't as good as they should have been. There were two big plays he had where that were called back on phantom penalties.
Mhm.
The 75-yard reception at the Raiders game I was at, and then there's another one or two here or there. But I really would want Alexander Madison. I've always been a big fan of his, partially because I've met him before and was the absolutely nicest human being.
Mhm.
But he could really be that third down running back that this team has been missing the past few years, where Mondre is still your number one guy, but Madison can catch the ball out of the backfield. He can still run pretty effectively. The Vikings offensive line was pretty beaten up this year. So he can spell Mondre, and then you can also have both Madison and Mondre in the backfield, and then they can throw to both guys. Sort of like how the Browns, who are is our new offensive coordinator, was the Browns offensive coordinator. They had both Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, both very effective. Both Kareem Hunt was more catching out of the backfield, but they had both and were effective with both. So having two 1A running backs, I think, would be beneficial. So Madison was cut by the Vikings this week, and I would actually kind of hope that they get him. He's still young, still has some looks like he has some juice on his legs.
Yeah, he fucked me in fantasy this year, so I'm done with him. So, but yeah, if they sign him, it's fine. The thing. He's a running back. There's not really. I don't think anyone does any more value position that as much as they used to.
Yeah.
So a running back is pretty replaceable, I think. All right, wide receiver. There's the big one. That we'll probably spend a little bit of time on. Just different names. We probably won't have too many arguments. I think Calvin Ridley sounds like the number one guy that they're going to be pursuing. And I think that's the easiest one. He's the best guy out there.
The
He
thing that I'm worried about is, I mean, he did have a down year this year and still had 1,000 yards,
Mhm.
but he's kind of inconsistent. He has a lot of drops, and since he is by far the number one guy in the market, I feel like you're going to have to severely overpay to get him.
Mhm.
If there, if it was totally up to me and I was the GM, what I would do, which some fans might not like, but I would sign Tyler Boyd. He'd be my number one free agent, with the assumption you also trade for, or if he's cut, sign Cortland Sutton. I've always been a big Cortland Sutton fan. He's not the same guy he was before his injury 4 or 5 years ago, but he was still very effective this year, had 700 or 800 yards, had 10 touchdowns.
He's a better
He
Parker.
would essentially be what?
He's a better Devontae Parker.
He is. So you get rid of Devontae Parker. You don't have that true number one. You still would draft a guy in the second round, or you take Harrison, depending on what your thoughts are on the quarterback position. But you could get that number one guy in the draft. You go into the year with the rookie you draft in the first 34 picks: Tyler Boyd, Cortland Sutton, Kendrick Bourne, Pop Douglas, and Juju Smith Schuster, and you
Right.
have 5 to 6 guys right there. So that's what I would do personally. I think Ridley, if you can get him at a reasonable contract, I want to give him more than 3 years, 60. And I think even that might be an overpay, but you front load it just because you have so much cap space.
Mhm.
But that's my thoughts. I think Gabe Davis does. You're gonna be overpaying for potential that he hasn't really shown the true production. Hollywood Brown isn't the same player as he was his first year or two. Curtis Samuel is just like an there isn't really too many good options available in free agency outside of Ridley. Boyd, I think, is a fine number two, three piece, and Cortland Sutton, I think, is a good, very good number two.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree with trying to get Cortland Sutton, especially if they're trying to trade him because they already traded Judy. Like I said, I'd
And
probably just pay Ridley.
I would have rather had Sutton than Judy as well. I
Yes,
wasn't
I
upset
agree.
that they didn't get him. Judy has always been name only and potential. He's never lived up to it.
Yeah, yeah, he's been invisible, and they tried everything they could do to try and bring him to get him touches and feature him, and even having Sean Payton there, and didn't do anything for him. So I don't think Judy really has anything. So
Yeah,
Sutton is the guy I'd want from that team. I would I would go with just signing Ridley. Like I said, I wouldn't completely overextend myself and just
yeah.
completely pay him a shit ton of money because he's not going to be a number one wide receiver. If you can't get him, I would have gone with Curtis Samuel just because he's always kind of impressed me when I've watched him. Um, and I've had him on fantasy, so he's put up some good numbers. So again, he's not a number one, maybe not even number. He's like a
I
two
want
or
to put him as
three.
number two.
I would say
I
he's
put him.
probably
He was
closer to a
barely number
three.
three on the Commanders.
Yeah. So again, you're going to be kind of fit with the same sort of issues you've had um, with this team. So the other thing that you could possibly do, and they said they want to be active on the trade front. You really need someone that actually wants to trade someone to get rid of them. So there's
There is,
Ayuk from
yeah,
the 49ers if he's available, depending
he's not
on
gonna
what their
be.
contract situation is. It's always Justin Jefferson,
He's
which it sounds like they're very far apart on contract terms. So either this year or next year he may be available. So depending on what happens with them and the quarterback position, if they don't have a quarterback at all, I don't know if they're going to want to pay Jefferson because they won't have anyone to throw him the ball. Um, so if
then
that becomes
one
available,
intriguing name on that hasn't really been mentioned, but my guy Adrian has been hoping for the last couple months and might not be this offseason, but possibly next season. Chris Olave from the Saints was a
Mhm.
first round pick. Saints are an absolute cap hell with essentially no way of getting out, and he's going to be getting a contract extension soon. I don't know how you pay him the contract he's going to get. So if you can give up a first, like a second rounder next year, or maybe even if you really believe in him, a second round, the number 34 pick this year to get Chris Olave as your number one wide receiver, maybe that's something. I don't know if the Saints are willing. Maybe they're going to keep hoping they can pass the buck down the road, but he might be someone that's available because of that.
Yep. All right. Going on next. We had tight end here. Realistically, they already
The
signed Hunter Henry.
the only
Eric.
other one that's on the market that makes sense is Noah Fant, in my opinion. In this offense, he might be productive, but it's not an essential need since you're bringing back Hunter. But it's just the draft outside of
It,
Brock Bowers, there isn't
mhm.
really anyone. It's not a good draft for tight end, so you might want to get someone that's on the market with Noah
Yeah.
Fant being one of the better options.
And I'd probably re-sign Farrell Brown.
Yeah.
I don't know if I just like him because of his name and he was kind of productive,
I
but
still don't know if he's a number two though. I think
yeah.
if you want to run a system with tight ends, you'd want another one too with Parker's or Hunter Henry's uh Hunter Henry's injury history, even
Mhm.
though he's been productive with the Patriots.
Yeah. All right. Offensive tackle, re-sign one, we both think. Tyrone Smith or Jonah Williams would be the next kind of two options.
Yep.
That you can have as your left tackle because what I would prefer they do because they're not going to be drafting a left tackle. I don't think number three.
I think they are.
Number three?
Oh, not number three, not
Oh,
number three.
I was gonna
I
say.
didn't hear that last part.
Oh, I think it's going to be in the second or third round.
Yep.
Um, it's really hard to start a left tackle in their first year. Usually you'll have them play right tackle and then move them over to left tackle for the unless they're like a really top pick. So having a third rounder start right away at left tackle is pretty hard. So in that aspect, if you can get Tyrone Smith for like a year or two, he's up there in age. He's what 30, 31.
I think he's
Um,
34.
oh, even older than I thought.
Let me
Let's
see.
see.
33, turning 34.
33, yeah. So he's
Yeah,
33,
33.
34. So if you can get him for a year or two, I would do that. And then worst case scenario, when you re-sign a Wenu, you could always move him back to guard and then or you can manipulate it some way.
Yeah.
So that way everything works out. He'd probably be the better one. Jonah Williams is also available. I think he's pretty good, serviceable, but he's younger, 26. He may try and get a longer contract. So it depends what you want to do there. But the line is something you really need to fortify. So they definitely, I think, need to sign someone else there, so that way you have a serviceable left tackle and right tackle going into the draft.
Yeah, the only other one that it's not a free agent, but again, my guy Adrian has been on and is hoping since the Broncos are having a big fire sale. Garrett Bowles, their left
Hmm.
tackle. If you can get him, he only has 1 year left on his deal. But if you can trade maybe a mid to late round pick, maybe a couple late round picks to get him, you at least solidify a left tackle for the next year. If you draft a guy in the second or third round and isn't available or isn't ready to start day one, you at
Hmm.
least have a very serviceable option at left tackle.
Yep. All right, moving on defense. So this will go really quickly because the defense is pretty solid right now. Both, I think, want them to resign Jennings. Will Mark
Mac Wilson.
Mac Wilson. I don't know. I'm forgetting his name. Mac Wilson and Miles Bryant. Everyone's gonna say Miles Bryant, but he's actually gotten pretty dependable.
He was one of your
Um,
most dependable players this past year, which is
yeah.
kind of surprising.
Hmm.
And then Mac Wilson really stepped up. Report came out today that they offered him a 3 year deal that they thought was very competitive, but he's still going to hit the free agency market.
Hmm.
I know he's very excited about Mayo, so my guess is he'll ultimately come back, but
Hmm.
we'll see about that.
Yep.
And I really like Jennings this year. He was just a
Hmm.
stud, so I
Yep.
really hope they bring him back.
So D line, some options that are out there. Christian Wilkins from
Christian
the.
Wilkins is my number one
Mhm.
guy in all of free agency. I know you're going to say defense wasn't the issue this past year. Why are you going defense with your top free agency that you're bringing in? And a big thing is there just isn't many good free agents on the offensive side of the ball. So if you can at least help shore up this defense where it's a championship caliber defense, even if your offense isn't there, your defense can help carry you. We saw the Steelers win what 9, 10 games this year with
Mhm.
no offense.
Yeah.
Uh, mm, the Jets even won 7 or 8 games with again no offense. But if you sign Christian Wilkins, it's going to be expensive, and you're going to likely want to extend Christian Barmore. Probably going to have to pay both of them 4 to 5 year contracts at 100 million each, where
Mhm.
it's 50 million AAV for two defensive tackles. But both of those tackles mixed with Judon, if you sign another defensive end or you draft a guy or Jennings, that's going to completely disrupt other teams' offenses, both in the running attack and the passing game. So by having both, I wouldn't sign Christian Wilkins and then with the thought you're gonna let Barmore go in a year. I'd want to have both of them for the next 4 to 5 years, but Christian Wilkins is by far my number one option.
Yep. No, he's a good option there. Chase Young and Joey Bosa is not available yet, but supposedly he's going to be cut.
Cut or traded for a late round pick.
Mhm.
He has a lot of money left on his the next 2 years. So since you have a lot of cap space, maybe you find it worth it. But a $36 million cap hit, I don't think is worth it for next
Yeah.
year. So I'd wait to see if he's cut. And if he's cut, you can try and then give him a good contract. But
Yep.
Chase Young hasn't really lived up to it after his rookie year. So again, I feel like teams might overbid just on his name
Hmm.
without his production. But Joey Bosa, I'd rather have than Chase Young. But
Yep. And another option, Andrew Van Ginkel.
yeah,
Was a funny name to say, and he's done really well against the Patriots, so he's another option out there as well. Some corners out there in case they want to fortify that aspect. Gilmore is going to be available. He's getting up there in age, so
but
is it?
he's still been very productive even
Mhm.
after leaving the Patriots, and even getting up in age, he's still been productive.
Yeah.
I know we're pretty solid at the cornerback position with Gonzo. You have Jonathan Jones, but he's getting up there in age.
Hmm.
But outside of that, it's Marcus Jones, Alex Austin, and Marco Williams or Marco Wilson. I think it's Wilson.
Wilson.
But you still really need a solidified boundary corner. If you think Jonathan Jones is that for the next 1 or 2 years, then you're
Hmm.
probably okay. If you don't, then you want to at least test the waters. And
Yep.
then there's also Tre'Davious White from the Bills who is cut. He has been a multiple time All Pro. He is coming off back-to-back brutal injuries. He tore his Achilles and then tore his ACL. But if you think he still has something left in the tank, maybe 1 or 2 year flyer or incentive laden deal to see if he has something, and maybe you catch lightning in a bottle. And then
Hmm.
having Gonzo with a Tre'Davious White might be a pretty good cornerback room.
Yep. And there's always there's Snead from the Chiefs, who
Yep.
I don't think they'll be able to just swing the trade because supposedly he is going for a second round pick. I don't think I would give up 34 for that. I think they have a lot more needs at that 34 position, either
Yep.
wide receiver or tackle. But if
If
they
you
can
can give up
somehow
next year's
swing,
second,
yeah, if they can give up next year's second and then even next year's third or fourth with it, I would definitely do it. I don't think it's probably going to do it. But if for some reason his market's less because you have to trade and pay him, um, I'd do that. I'd do a second next year and a third or fourth. So depends on what the Chiefs want or get for him. And then safeties, some available guys out there, just in case they need Justin Simmons, Xavier McKinney, Jimmy Chin. Anyone want to hit them any quickly, or do you want to get to the mailbag?
I'd hit on them just quickly. Justin Simmons was kind of a shocker that he was released. He was all pro, second team all pro the last 3 years with the Broncos. He is getting up in age. I think he's 30. Yeah, he's 30, but he's still got a lot left in the tank. He's a more of a traditional free safety. He went to Boston College, so he is a local kid. I think he would be absolutely perfect for this defense, even with assuming that Kyle Duggar, they bring him back either with a transition tag, him signing that, or getting a long term deal. But him, Peppers, and Duggars have very similar but different skill sets where they'll actually blend perfectly together, in my opinion. And I think that will help this defense be absolutely loaded. If you're able to bring in Justin Simmons and Christian Wilkins, if I was GM, this defense, assuming it stays healthy, would just be absolutely loaded and would be the what hopefully carries this team. Again, I think he's likely going to go to Philly, but I hope that he's someone that they at least entertain.
Right. All right. So we have a free agency mailbag, which isn't really addressing free agency, but we'll address that anyway. Actually, no, it doesn't. But it'll address the draft, but we'll address that anyway. And we have a, mailbag that we forgot to get to last episode. Both from the same account at Tucker Ross Khan. So first question: which QBs do you want in the draft now that Mac's been traded? I think May or Penix is the best fit for AVP system, and would like either. Why are so many fans convinced JJ is a franchise QB and want us to take him? So we'll get into these more in depth to the draft season, but if right now, I think those two are probably the top two that I'd want to draft either as well. Right now, this is subject to change depending. I still need to watch more uh, what's his name's film,
Daniels.
Daniel's film, because I still don't know how I feel about his arm strength. So I need to see more about that. There's a couple games with one that doesn't look as great, the other it looks a little better. But the way I see it, May has the intangibles where he's got the arm strength, he's got the size. His footwork is not good. His mistakes that he makes, throwing off his back foot, throwing into coverage, holding on to the ball too long. A lot of the mistakes that Mac made last year, May made the exact same mistakes, but he got away with it because one, he's got a better arm than Mac, and two, he's facing lesser competition, so he's able to get away
Not
with
only
it.
lesser competition because it's college, but it's also a lower college conference.
Yeah, so I would prefer him to sit, and I think he's probably the best, other than Caleb Williams, he's got the best kind of intangibles out there. Penix has a really great arm. He has those injury issues from before in both knees. And he's a lefty. I just something about lefties. I don't think no one really likes. It's a little bit harder, I think, for wide receivers sometimes just because of the spin on the ball. Um, but those are the two that I think as well. JJ McCarthy, I don't see as well. I think what a lot of people like about him. He's young, and he's like I
Oh,
like I
he's a
think
winner,
about
Kevin.
he's
I'm
a
surprised
winner.
you're not all over him.
He's a winner, and I don't know. I'm watching him. Just nothing screams out that I like him. So he makes a lot of mistakes. He gets away with it because he doesn't have to throw the ball that much. But yeah, I don't love him yet. Maybe I could fall in love with him. I'm not gonna call him a bust right away, but I just don't see it completely. And I will watch more of him just to see. And I haven't watched a ton. I've watched maybe 3 or 4 games of him. So he could win me over depending on how much I see more. But right now, from what I've seen, not someone I would prefer they pick.
Yeah. No, I agree with your sentiments. I've been really big on Penix the last 4 or 5 months, just watching him, being on the West Coast, seeing more of the University of Washington games. his arm strength is extremely impressive. He has a lot of the intangibles. He Everyone in the locker room loves him. He's a very high character guy. Even when he went to the Heisman trophy presentation, uh, I believe it was Daniels had a custom made jacket with like his number and everything, which is fine. But Penix had a custom made suit jacket with the name of every single teammate on the inside to give props to them, saying it without them, I wouldn't be standing here. Uh, his injury history is concerning. Both the first 4 years at Indiana, he had a season-ending injury all 4 years. Both knees, his shoulders, so it is concerning. But the report is that his medical's checked out, so he was durable the last 2 years at Washington. Pac-12 this year was actually very competitive, and he really lit it up. His arm strength is impressive. He's played in bad weather and still slinging it through. With that arm strength that he has, he's probably the best deep ball passer in the draft this year. So I'm all for Penix. In a perfect world, if I was the decision maker, I would take Harrison at 3, trade back into the first, and take Penix. It would be a risk because you'd have to assume that teams in the middle of the first aren't going to take him and that you'd be able to get him. So like teams like the Steelers, Miami, Seattle, Vikings, if they fall in love with him, they might take him, even if you might not assess them as a potential need at QB. But if we're staying at 3, I'd definitely go with May. Like you said, his fundamentals and footwork scares the crap out of me. But whoever we get, I want them to sit year one. And I think by learning behind a good mentor like a Jacoby Brissett, you can see on film with coaching that's helping you with it. That's some things I hope you can fix. I don't know
Mhm.
if they'll be able to, but you're in a position where all you're doing year one is just learning and you're not having that pressure. That's where I hope that his arm strength, his talent is what will help him succeed. And having that year of rest will help him get to that next level. I do not like JJ at all. He is young, like you said, he is a winner. But when I watch him, he's nothing special at all.
Mhm.
I don't understand why people are so high on him. If you draft him, sit him for, give him the Jordan Love treatment, maybe he has the potential to be successful. But if you're drafting him to start this upcoming year, maybe even next year, I don't see him having a successful career, even if he does go to a team like the Falcons or the Vikings that are loaded at receiver.
Business,
Because if you
unless
look at
he
the Fal
has three top running backs and he hands off 50 times a game,
Yeah.
like he did at
And like
Michigan.
if you look at the Falcons, like some people are saying if he goes to the Falcon, a team that's loaded at receiver, he's not going to have to do much. But the Falcons with Desmond Ritter were loaded at receiver and
Mhm.
running back, and he was still not good. So again, I don't see what the fascination with JJ McCarthy is at all. I think it's more than likely he's going to be a bust unless he sits for 2 to 3 years.
I think the Falcons still may be a good spot for him based off of kind of the reports that sounds like Cousins is probably going to sign there.
If Cousins
Um,
signs there and he sits for 2 to 3 years, I think that's
yeah.
a good spot. If
Mhm.
he's drafted by the Falcons to start day one, I think it's going to be an utter failure.
No, I agree. Yeah, I think that may be a good situation. Just based off kind of the reports out there, it sounds like Cousins probably signing with the Falcons. And apparently he was looking at schools like last week there. So he's doing his due diligence. So we'll see. All right, last question, real quick, because I got to get this podcast uploaded. Do you think Ryland is our starting kicker next year? Um,
This I can tackle this
I don't
first. I think
know.
this is actually kind of a fascinating question to an extent because it's going to depend on if I what my guess is going to happen is they're going to sign a free agent kicker or draft someone in late rounds to be
Mhm,
competition and see who wins the job out of camp, who has the best training camp preseason. But again, supposedly he was making all those kicks in practices and just had the yips.
mhm.
And in practices, he was still making it. So do you trust him enough going into the season? Sometimes kickers fix that. Nick Folk, before he came to the Patriots,
It's horrible.
had a terrible streak of just missed kick after missed kick, but he
Mhm,
corrected it. But if Chad Ryland say cut this offseason or they sign someone or they draft someone in the middle rounds, that might be the front office saying this was Bill's guy, we want nothing to do with him,
mhm,
and trying to cast everything out and just kick him to the curb. You definitely see his talent even in that game-winning kick. I
mhm.
think it was just more mental and the yips, which
Yeah.
can be corrected. So that's why I would at least give him a chance to win the job. If he loses the competition, then so be it. Or
Mm.
next year comes, he wins the competition, next year comes around, he keeps missing kicks, then you just go another direction.
Yeah. And historically, rookie kickers have not had that much success. So
Yep.
year two may be a little bit better for him too. And he's going to have more experience just with kicking in the NFL, and the stadiums are different, the sizing, all that sort of stuff. So
Yep.
yeah, we'll see. If I had to guess, I would say probably, but because it's a new regime, they're less married to the fact that he was a fourth round pick.
Even though Grow
And
is the one that was in charge of the
mhm,
draft last year and he's
yeah,
still head of scouting. So that's the tricky part. But if they want to say this was Bill's guy, you were separate from that old
yeah.
regime, then I could see that.
Yeah. All right. So thank you everyone for listening. We'll be back. Our next episode, we'll probably recap what happened in free agency. Probably in a week or two, depending on how many moves happen, if it's a slow or fast kind of movement. Make sure you follow us on Twitter or X at Pat's Rehab Level Pod. Just for up-to-minute updates, our commentary, getting a lot of traction there. If you see our Bill Daily Savings Time post, and subscribe, rate, and review. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, like I said, and make sure you subscribe. We're also on YouTube as well. We're now on Rumble as another video platform for anyone that uses that instead of YouTube. Just trying to make sure we have as many platforms as possible so you can have any sort of way you want to watch us or listen to us. So thank you again, and look forward to talking to you guys next time.